My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 65, and at my own granddaughter's wedding, my son and daughter-in-law gave me a name tag that read, "The old lady who will pay for everything." They thought it was a hilarious joke. They didn't know that my late husband, in his final act of love, had left behind a secret clause in his will. A ticking time bomb set to go off at the first sign of public humiliation. Before I tell you all about how that one secret turned their world upside down and gave me my life back, let me know where you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far my story has traveled. The day of my granddaughter Sophia's wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect late spring day that promises nothing but happiness. I spent extra time getting ready, a ritual that had become more poignant since my husband, Edward, passed away 3 years ago. I chose the silver blue dress he'd always loved, the one he said matched my eyes. As I dabbed a bit of the perfume he'd given me for our last anniversary behind my ears, I could almost hear his voice, a low, warm rumble in my memory. "You look beautiful, Maggie." I smiled at my reflection. A woman of 65 with more silver than brown in her hair, with lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and loss. I had financed most of this lavish $75,000 wedding. It was a significant sum, but I wanted Sophia to have the perfect day. After all, what was money for if not to bring joy to the family Edward and I had built together? The ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral was everything I'd hoped for. Sophia was radiant, a vision in white lace, and my son, Thomas, beamed with a father's pride as he walked her down the aisle. Even my daughter-in-law, Victoria, a woman whose emotions were often as carefully curated as her designer wardrobe, seemed to dab at her eyes with a genuine tear. For those few moments, everything felt right, a perfect family portrait. The illusion shattered the moment I arrived at the Grand Plaza Hotel for the reception. The ballroom was magnificent, dripping with crystals and overflowing with white roses, every detail a testament to the checks I had signed. I made my way to the check-in table where a smiling young woman named Lily was handing out table assignments and name tags. "Mrs. Wilson, so lovely to have you," she said cheerfully, her eyes scanning the alphabetized cards. "Here you are." She handed me a small, elegant card with beautiful calligraphy. I glanced down, expecting to see Margaret Wilson, grandmother of the bride. Instead, the words swam before my eyes, sharp and cruel. "The old lady who will pay for everything." A cold shock radiated from my chest. My hand, which had been reaching to take the pin, froze in midair. This had to be a mistake, a sick, twisted, horrible mistake. "Is something wrong, Mrs. Wilson?" she asked, her smile faltering as she saw my expression. I forced my own lips into a smile, a brittle thing that felt like it might crack. "There seems to be a mix-up with my name tag." She leaned over to look. Her eyes widened in horror, and a deep blush crept up her neck. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. I didn't even read it. They were all pre-printed when they were delivered. Let me see if there's another one for you." My mind was racing. Who would do this? Who could be so callous? The elegant script was undeniably Victoria's. The so-called joke reeked of her particular brand of passive-aggressive cruelty, a humor that always came at someone else's expense. "It's quite all right," I said quickly, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I didn't want to cause a scene. This was still Sophia's day. But Lily was already looking through the box. "There isn't another one, Mrs. Wilson. This is the only card with your name on it." "Then don't worry about it," I said, my voice firmer now. I made that decision in that split second. I would not hide. I would not allow them the satisfaction of seeing me retreat in shame. I took the card, pinned the offensive tag to the delicate fabric of my silver blue dress, and walked into the ballroom with my head held high, my cheeks burning as if I had a fever. As I moved through the throngs of guests, I could feel their eyes on me. Some would glance, do a double take, and then quickly look away, their faces a mixture of pity and embarrassment. Others, friends of Thomas and Victoria, whispered behind their hands, a cruel smirk playing on their lips. I overheard one woman, dressed in a gaudy fuchsia dress, whisper to her companion, "Victoria wasn't kidding. Apparently she's their personal ATM." Her friend snickered. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. Just as I was seeking a quiet corner to compose myself, Thomas spotted me. "Mom, over here," he called, waving me toward a group of well-dressed men. "Come meet the Hamiltons. Dad used to golf with Bill." Reluctantly, I approached. Bill Hamilton looked vaguely familiar, one of Edward's business associates. His wife, Eleanor, was a picture of quiet dignity, her eyes kind and intelligent. "Bill, Eleanor, this is my mother," Thomas said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. Then he laughed, a hearty, oblivious sound that made my blood run cold, or as we like to call her, our walking bank account. Bill Hamilton's smile faltered. Eleanor's gaze dropped to the name tag on my dress, and a flicker of disbelief and distaste crossed her features before she quickly masked it. I ignored Thomas's comment, extending my hand to Eleanor. "Alice Edwards," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. I had to correct myself in my distress. I had used my maiden name and my late husband's first name. My mind was reeling. I meant to say Margaret Wilson, Edward's widow. The slip was a sign of how deeply shaken I was. "Of course," Eleanor said, her voice gentle as she squeezed my hand. "Edward spoke of you often. He was so very proud of you." Her words were a balm on a raw wound. Later, as the party was in full swing, I saw James Peterson, Edward's longtime lawyer and friend, making his way toward me. He was a kind, serious man who had handled Edward's estate with great care. His eyes, like Eleanor's, immediately fell on my name tag. His jovial expression vanished, replaced by a thunderous scowl. "Margaret," he said, his voice low and tight with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" "It's a joke, apparently," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "That's not a joke. That's an insult," he said, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Thomas, who was laughing loudly at the bar. "Edward would be furious. He would—" James stopped himself, looking around to ensure no one was listening. "Margaret, we need to talk. Not here. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? It's a matter of great importance regarding Edward's final wishes." His tone was so grave, so urgent, that a new kind of chill, of intrigue and apprehension settled over me. "Of course, James," I said. "I'll be there at 10.
The next morning, I drove to James Peterson's office, a stately brick building downtown. The weight of the previous day's humiliation had settled into a hard knot in my stomach. I had barely slept. The image of that name tag, of my son's laughing face, replaying in my mind. James's office was a sanctuary of quiet dignity, filled with the scent of old leather and paper. He greeted me, not with a handshake, but with a concerned look, ushering me toward one of the large, comfortable chairs opposite his mahogany desk. "Coffee, Margaret?" he asked gently. I shook my head, unable to imagine swallowing anything. "James, what is this about?" I asked, my voice betraying my exhaustion. He sighed, settling into his own chair. "Margaret, I was Edward's friend for over 30 years. I knew him as a brilliant businessman, but more importantly, as a man who loved his family fiercely, especially you." He paused, choosing his words with care. He was also a shrewd judge of character, and he was worried. Worried about what? "About this," James said, gesturing vaguely as if to encompass the events of the wedding. He was worried about how Thomas and Victoria would treat you after he was gone. He saw Thomas's entitlement, and he saw Victoria's ambition. He worried that without him here, they would start to see you not as a mother, but as a means to an end. His words were so accurate, they felt like a physical blow. Edward had seen it all. "Shortly before he passed," James continued, leaning forward, He had me come to the hospital. He was weak, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He had me draw up a codicil to his will, an addendum. He made me swear not to tell you about it unless I felt it became absolutely necessary. After what I saw yesterday, I believe it is. He unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He slid it across the polished wood toward me. This is a copy. The original is in the firm's vault. My hands trembled as I took it. I broke the seal and unfolded the heavy legal paper. The language was dense, full of legalese about inheritance and bequests, but the core of it was brutally clear. James explained it in simpler terms. Edward's estate, after all assets were liquidated and investments managed, is worth just over $8 million, far more than even you realized. He was a very conservative, private man. According to the primary will, that fortune is to be divided upon your passing. Half goes to you to manage for your lifetime, and the other half is split between his descendants, Thomas, and, through him, your grandchildren. I nodded. This much I knew. But the codicil, James said, tapping a finger on the document in my hands, changes everything. It's an override. Edward called it the respect clause. It states, in no uncertain terms, that any descendant who publicly humiliates you, who treats you with profound disrespect, or who attempts to control your finances against your will, forfeits their entire share of the inheritance. I looked up from the page, stunned into silence. The room seemed to tilt. $8 million. Forfeit? The forfeited share, James continued, his voice steady, is to be redistributed. Half the forfeited amount goes directly to you, with no strings attached. The other half is to be divided among the remaining descendants who have, and I quote, consistently shown you the proper respect and care befitting a matriarch. Why wouldn't he tell me? I whispered, my throat tight. Because he hoped it would never be needed. He said softly. He told me, I don't want them to be good to her because they're scared of losing money, James. I want them to be good to her because she's their mother and they love her. He wanted to give them the chance to do the right thing, but he also wanted to give you a shield, just in case. A shield. It felt more like a sword. A weapon of unimaginable power had just been placed in my hands. Yesterday, James said, his professional demeanor returning, the name tag, Thomas's public comments, that would certainly qualify as public humiliation. As the executor of the estate, I have a fiduciary duty to enforce this clause, if you so choose. I sat back, the leather creaking under my weight. I could end it, right now. I could call Thomas and Victoria, tell them what they had done, and watch them as their world of easy money and casual cruelty came crashing down. But as I pictured their faces, I felt a wave of something more complex than anger. I felt a profound, aching sadness. This was my son, my family. I closed my eyes and saw Edward's face, not as the powerful man in the boardroom, but as the young man I'd married, full of dreams and potential. The man who held my hand through childbirth and grief. We had raised our son together. Where had we gone wrong? Margaret? James's voice brought me to the present. I folded the document carefully and slid it back into the envelope. I looked across the desk at this man who had been my husband's loyal friend. I'm not going to do anything, I said, and my own voice surprised me with its strength. Not yet. But Margaret, I know, I interrupted. But Edward was right. He wanted to give them a chance. So I will. I will give them one last test. I need to see. I need to know for certain if there is anything left of the family we built, or if it's all just this. I stood up, my resolve hardening. The grief was still there, but now it was forged with something new, a cold, clear purpose. I would go home, and I would wait. I would let them show me their true colors, once and for all. This was no longer about a name tag. This was about the legacy of my husband's love and the very soul of my family. I would not start a war, not yet, but I would find out just how deep the rot went. This was not about revenge. This was about the truth. The days following my meeting with James were shrouded in a strange calm. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by the grim determination of a detective embarking on a difficult case. My family was now my primary subject of investigation. My first step was to understand the full scope of the problem. I retreated to Edward's study, the one room in the house that still felt entirely his, and pulled out years of financial records. I had always trusted Thomas with the details, assuming his business degree made him more qualified. I had never bothered to look closely. Now I did. I spread bank statements and canceled checks across the large oak desk. It didn't take long to see the pattern. It had started subtly, about 6 months after Edward's funeral. "Mom, the kitchen is looking so dated. We're thinking of a little remodel. Nothing fancy." A week later, Thomas called. "About that kitchen, Mom. With Sophia's college fund and everything, we're a bit stretched. I know Dad left you comfortable, and we were thinking maybe you'd want to help out." I had written a check for $30,000. I saw it there, in my own handwriting, dated and cashed. Looking back, that was the beginning of the flood. That little remodel became a full-blown home renovation, complete with a wine cellar. Then there were the luxury cars for both Sophia and her younger brother Michael when they turned 18. There were the family vacations to the Caribbean that I was always invited to join, on the unspoken condition that I would fund the entire trip. I sat there for hours, a calculator in my hand, my coffee growing cold beside me. The evidence was damning. In just under 3 years, I had given them nearly $300,000. It wasn't just help. It was a lifestyle. My lifestyle, which I lived modestly, was funding their extravagant one. The realization left me feeling hollow and profoundly foolish. My tally was interrupted by the ringing of my phone. The caller ID flashed, Victoria. I took a deep breath and answered, my voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Victoria. I was just busy in the study." "Oh, good. Richard and I just wanted to thank you again for everything. Wasn't the wedding just beautiful? Sophia and Mark are so grateful for your generosity." "I was happy to help," I said, the words feeling like a lie. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling," she continued, getting to the point with predictable speed. "There's been a little snag with the honeymoon. Mark's parents were supposed to pay for it, but his father's business has had some setbacks. They've had to back out. Jennifer is just devastated." She used the wrong names for my grandchildren again, a testament to how little she truly thought of them beyond their roles in her social theater. I waited, saying nothing. "Well," she prodded, "they've had their hearts set on 2 weeks in Bali. It's about $25,000 for the package they want. We were wondering if you might be able to, help out." The audacity of it coming so soon after the wedding humiliation was breathtaking. They hadn't even apologized. They had simply moved on to the next transaction. This was a test. My first real test. The old me would have sighed and said yes, just to keep the peace, just to make my granddaughter happy. But the old me was gone. "Victoria," I said, my voice calm and measured, "I'm afraid that's not possible right now. I've been reviewing my finances since the wedding. Things are not as stable as I thought. I need to be more careful. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, calculating, recalibrating. Not stable? She squeaked, her voice losing its sugary coating. But Edward's investments, the company. Things change, Victoria, I said simply. I'm sorry, but I can't help with the honeymoon. They might have to consider a more modest destination. Perhaps somewhere in New England. New England? She said the words as if I had suggested they honeymoon in a dumpster. Alice, they need to book soon. I understand. I wish them the best. And before she could argue further, I added, I have to go now, Victoria. My financial advisor is waiting. I hung up, my heart pounding. I didn't have a financial advisor waiting, but saying it felt good. It felt powerful. I had drawn a line in the sand. It was a small line, but it was a start. I had a feeling the blowback would be significant, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. For a few days after the phone call with Victoria, there was a chilling silence from my son's house. No calls, no texts. It was the kind of punitive silence I'd grown accustomed to whenever I failed to meet their expectations. But this time it didn't fill me with anxiety. It filled me with a strange sense of peace. The peace was broken by a knock on my door late one afternoon. I looked through the peephole and was surprised to see my grandson, Michael, shifting nervously on the porch. At 21, he was tall like his grandfather, with the same kind eyes that seemed to hold a wisdom beyond his years. He had always been different from the rest of them. Grandma, he said as I opened the door, his voice soft. He stepped forward and gave me a hug, a genuine embrace that felt nothing like the stiff air kiss greetings I got from his parents. Michael, sweetheart, what a surprise. Come in, I said, my heart warming for the first time in days. He followed me to the kitchen and I put the kettle on for tea. He sat at the small kitchen table where he'd done his homework as a boy, his long legs looking out of place under it now. I wanted to apologize, Grandma, he said, looking down at his hands. For the wedding, the name tag, the way everyone was talking, it wasn't right. I should have said something. A lump formed in my throat. You noticed? Of course I noticed, he said, looking up, his eyes filled with the familiar shame. So did a lot of people. I'm so sorry. Dad and Mom have changed since Grandpa died. Or maybe I'm just old enough to see it now. All they talk about is money. Your money, specifically. The kettle whistled, giving me a moment to compose myself. I poured the hot water over the tea bags, my hands steady. What do you mean, Michael? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. It's just, I overhear things. And I didn't want to worry you, but after what happened at the wedding, I feel like you need to know. I sat down across from him, placing a cup of tea in front of him. You can tell me anything. He took a deep breath. Last week, I overheard them talking in the study. Dad was on the phone with a realtor. They were talking about this house. He gestured around the kitchen at the floral wallpaper I had picked out with Edward 30 years ago. Dad said something about how it's too much house for one person and how the real estate market is hot right now. He was asking about its market value. A cold dread, colder than anything I had felt at the wedding, crept into my veins. This went beyond requests for money, for cars and vacations. This was about my home, my sanctuary. And then, Michael continued, his voice barely a whisper, Mom mentioned Sunrise Acres. Sunrise Acres, the upscale retirement community on the other side of town. It was a lovely place, but it was a place people went when they could no longer care for themselves. It was an ending. My home was a beginning, a middle, and everything in between. It was filled with the ghosts of a happy life. They were talking about how to convince you to downsize, Michael said, the word tasting like poison in his mouth.
Mom said it would be better for everyone and that they could help you manage the proceeds from the sale to ensure you were taken care of for the rest of your life. The euphemisms were sickening. Manage the proceeds. I knew exactly what that meant. It meant a small apartment for me and a large windfall for them. The dots connected with terrifying clarity. My recent refusal to fund the honeymoon must have spooked them. They had decided to stop asking for scraps and go for the whole feast.
I looked at my grandson, at his worried face, and felt a surge of love and gratitude. He was the one bright spot in this gathering darkness. He was his grandfather's grandson. I had been planning to test my family, but I hadn't realized the test was already so far advanced, and that I was failing so badly in their eyes. They didn't just see me as an ATM anymore. They saw me as an obstacle living in their biggest potential asset. I reached across the table and patted his hand. His skin was warm and solid. "Thank you for telling me, Michael. It took courage." "I love you, Grandma," he said simply. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "And don't you worry. They may think I'm just a little old lady, but I'm more my husband's wife than they seem to remember. And Edward Wilson never, ever let anyone take what was his." As Michael left, I stood by the window and watched him go. The silent vow I'd made in James's office now had a new, harder edge. This was no longer just a test to see if they were worthy. This was a fight to protect my life and my home. And it was a fight I had no intention of losing. 3 days after Michael's visit, I received an e-vite to a post-wedding celebration brunch at the Oak Ridge Country Club, hosted by Thomas and Victoria. My first instinct was to decline. The thought of facing their circle of sycophantic friends again made my stomach churn. But my new resolve pushed the thought aside. This wasn't a social event, it was a battlefield. And a good general always surveys the terrain. I chose my outfit with care. Not the gentle silver blue of the wedding, but a smart cream pantsuit that Edward had always said made me look regal. I felt I needed the armor. The private dining room at the country club was buzzing with the same crowd from the wedding. Victoria, resplendent in a floral dress that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills, air-kissed me. "Alice, you look nice," she said, her tone suggesting mild surprise that I had managed to dress myself presentably. They had seated me at a table near the back, next to Mark's parents, whom I barely knew, and far from Sophia and Michael. It was a clear, deliberate social demotion. I was the financier, to be kept out of sight once my services were no longer immediately required. I took my seat, smiled politely, and observed. The brunch proceeded with forced gaiety until, just as dessert was being served, Victoria clinked her glass for attention. A practiced, brilliant smile was plastered on her face. "We just want to thank you all again for sharing in our joy, and of course, a special thank you to Grandma Alice, who has been so incredibly generous." All eyes turned to me. I felt a familiar heat rise in my cheeks. I had a sinking feeling I knew what was coming next. "In fact," Victoria continued, her voice rising with excitement, "we have another exciting announcement to share. Thanks to Grandma's generosity, Sophia and Mark will be able to take their dream honeymoon after all. We've booked 2 weeks in a private villa in Bali." A smattering of polite applause broke out. Sophia looked confused, glancing between her mother and me. Mark stared intently at his plate. My coffee cup, halfway to my lips, stopped in midair. I had explicitly told her no. Thomas, sitting at the head table, caught my eye and gave me a little nod, a gesture of a co-conspirator who has just sealed a deal. He expected me to smile and accept the honor they had bestowed upon me, the honor of paying. I carefully set my cup down on its saucer. The small click echoed in the sudden lull. I took a slow breath, gathering my strength. Every instinct screamed at me to stay silent, to avoid a scene, but the image of Edward's disappointed face, the memory of Michael's worried one, gave me courage. I stood up. My legs felt a little shaky, but I locked my knees. I smiled, a cool, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. "That sounds like a wonderful trip, Victoria," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent room. "But I believe there's been a misunderstanding."
I was not aware that I had agreed to fund it. A collective gasp went through the room. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Victoria's smile froze, then crumbled. Her face flushed a blotchy, angry red. Well, we discussed it, she stammered, forcing a brittle laugh. Remember, Alice? You said you'd think about it. We just assumed... Yes, I interrupted, my voice still level. I did say I would think about it, and I have. My answer is no. Thomas was on his feet in an instant. He strode over to my table, his face dark with fury. He leaned down, hissing in a stage whisper that was clearly meant to be heard by everyone nearby. Mom, what do you think you're doing? Don't make a scene. We've already told them they can book the trip. I looked up at my son, at the stranger he had become. Then you will have to unbook it. Or perhaps you and Victoria can pay for it yourselves. I believe your combined salary should be more than sufficient. That was a direct hit. I knew for a fact that they lived far beyond their means, constantly chasing a lifestyle they couldn't afford without my help. Victoria looked as if I had slapped her. How dare you, she hissed. In front of all our friends? I seem to have no problem making your announcement in front of them. I am merely correcting the public record. Mark's father, a quiet man, shifted uncomfortably. There were some business setbacks, he muttered, trying to explain his side. I understand completely, I said, turning to him with a genuinely kind expression. These things happen. What is inappropriate, however, is to publicly volunteer someone else's money without their explicit consent. Don't you agree? The table was utterly silent. No one dared to meet my eyes. I had broken the unspoken rule of polite society. I had talked about money and told the truth. I looked at Sophia. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with tears of humiliation. For a moment I felt a pang of pity for her, caught in the crossfire. I stood tall, smoothing the front of my jacket. Sophia, Mark, I said, my voice softening, I wish you every happiness. I will give you a wedding gift, as is customary, but a $25,000 honeymoon is not a gift. It is a major financial transaction, and I am not a bank. With that, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't run. I walked slowly, deliberately, my head held high, feeling the shocked stares of 50 people on my back. In the lobby, my composure finally cracked. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys. Dr. Rebecca Chen, Sophia's godmother and my old friend, caught up to me. Margaret, are you all right? She asked, her hand on my arm. I'm fine, Rebecca, just fine. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, she said quietly. As I drove home, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I had won the battle, but I had also declared war. There was no going back now. The lines had been drawn, not in the sand, but in solid stone.
The weeks after the brunch were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Thomas and Victoria's strategy was clear: complete and total isolation. They believed my greatest fear was loneliness, and they wielded it like a weapon. There were no more calls, no more texts, no more guilt-laden invitations. They had cut me off, expecting me to come crawling back, checkbook in hand, begging for forgiveness. They underestimated me. They mistook my grief for weakness, my love for a tool to be exploited. What they didn't understand was that their silence was a gift. It gave me space. It gave me time. And I used that time to build a new life, brick by quiet, deliberate brick. I enrolled in the watercolor painting class I'd always dreamed of. I reconnected with old friends like Rebecca and started a weekly lunch date with Eleanor Hamilton, the wonderfully dignified woman from the wedding. We discovered a shared love for gardening and classic films. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like Margaret Wilson again, not just Edward's widow or Thomas's mother. Most importantly, I focused my energy on Michael. We met every week to work on the business plan for his bookstore. I didn't just give him money, I gave him my time and attention, grilling him on profit margins and marketing strategies, pushing him to be as sharp as his grandfather had been. Watching his dream take shape was more satisfying than any luxury vacation they could have imagined.
I was investing in a future built on passion and hard work, not on entitlement. This was a legacy Edward would have been proud of. One afternoon, I decided it was time to move to the next phase of my plan. It was time to set the final trap. I took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and dialed Thomas's number. I let my voice sound frail, hesitant, the voice of a lonely old woman on the verge of surrender. "Thomas?" I said when he answered, his tone clipped and cold. "It's Mom." "I know who it is," he said. "What do you want?" I just wanted to talk," I said, injecting a slight tremor into my voice. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the brunch. Perhaps I was hasty. This big house, it's so empty." I heard a sharp intake of breath on his end. It was the sound of a predator scenting blood. "I've been looking over my finances," I continued, selling the performance. "It's all so complicated. Your father always handled these things. I'm thinking, maybe you and Victoria were right. Maybe I do need some help managing things." A long pause. I could almost hear the silent, triumphant conversation happening between him and Victoria. "Well, Mom," he said finally, his voice shifting, oozing a false, patronizing warmth. "I'm glad to hear you're being sensible. Of course we want to help. We've always had your best interests at heart." Liar, I thought, but I said, "My birthday is in 2 weeks. I was thinking of having a small gathering here at the house. Just family. I'd like to discuss my plans for the future, for my assets." "That sounds like a wonderful idea, Mom," he said, his voice practically purring. After I hung up, I sat for a moment, my heart pounding with a mixture of disgust and exhilaration. They had taken the bait. My next call was to James Peterson. My voice was no longer frail. It was crisp, clear, and commanding. "James, it's Margaret." "Margaret, I've been meaning to call. Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right, James. I'm setting a date. My 66th birthday, 2 weeks from Saturday, here at the house." "What's the occasion?" "The end of the game," I said. "I've baited the hook and Thomas is ready to bite. I'm going to let him suggest taking control of my finances, possibly even a power of attorney, in front of witnesses." There was a moment of silence on James's end, then a low whistle. "That's a bold move, Margaret." I replied, "Edward was a bold man. Now, I need you here, and I'd also like you to invite Richard Bennett, Edward's old business partner. Tell him I'm making some important announcements about Edward's estate and would value his presence." "Consider it done. But Margaret, are you sure you want to do this? It's going to be brutal." "It's already been brutal, James," I said, my gaze falling on a photo of Edward on the mantelpiece. "The difference is this time I'll be holding the sword. I need you there not as my knight in shining armor, but as the executor of the will. The final move, it has to be mine." I hung up the phone and walked over to the portrait. I traced the line of Edward's jaw with my fingertip. "All right, my love," I whispered to the quiet room. "The stage is set. Let's see how this final act plays out." The day of my 66th birthday arrived, not with the joy and celebration a birthday should bring, but with the tense, electric hum of an impending storm. I spent the morning in my garden, the simple act of pulling weeds and deadheading roses, calming my nerves. The garden, which I had neglected in my grief, was finally coming back to life, much like I was. I chose my dress with the same strategic care I'd applied to everything else. It was a simple but elegant sheath dress in a deep, bold red. It was a power color, a color that declared I was not a victim. Michael arrived early, his presence a comforting anchor in the turbulent waters I was about to navigate. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Grandma?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern as he arranged cheese and crackers on a platter. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, smoothing the red dress. "Besides, it's just a family dinner." We both knew it was a lie. The doorbell rang precisely at 5 o'clock. On the porch stood Thomas and Victoria, their smiles so wide and artificial I could almost hear the plastic stretching. "Happy birthday, Mom," Thomas boomed, thrusting a bouquet of cheap, store-bought carnations at me. "Alice, you look different," Victoria added, her eyes narrowing as they took in the red dress, my professionally styled hair, the subtle makeup I'd learned to apply in a class at the community center. The word she was searching for was strong, and it clearly unsettled her. "Thank you," I said simply, stepping back to let them in. Sophia and Mark arrived moments later, followed by James Peterson and a visibly curious Richard Bennett. Sophia gave me a hesitant hug. "Happy birthday, Grandma. I'm sorry about everything." Her apology was genuine, and I squeezed her hand in return. We settled in the dining room, the table gleaming with the good silver and crystal I hadn't used in years. I watched as Thomas's gaze roved around the room, assessing the value of the paintings on the wall, the antique sideboard. He was no longer seeing a home. He was seeing an asset portfolio. Victoria's eyes kept returning to a new landscape hanging over the fireplace, a watercolor I had painted myself. "Did you redecorate, Alice?" she asked, implying that I had no right to make changes without consulting her. "Just a few updates," I replied smoothly. "I've been taking painting classes." "Painting classes?" Thomas echoed, as if I'd announced I was taking up astronaut training. "Grandma's really talented," Michael said proudly, from his seat beside me. "She's already sold 2 pieces at the community art fair." "Sold?" Victoria looked genuinely bewildered. "But why would you need to sell paintings?" I smiled. "It's not about need, Victoria. It's about joy. You should try it sometime."
An uncomfortable silence fell, which was mercifully broken by Richard Bennett asking Michael about his bookstore. The conversation flowed, but the tension was a palpable presence at the table. A guest no one had invited, but everyone could feel. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee and cake, the main performance began. Richard cleared his throat, tapping his fork against his coffee cup to get everyone's attention. "Before we have cake," he announced, standing up and assuming a solemn expression, "there's something Pamela and I, and the whole family really, want to discuss." Another slip of the tongue. He called his wife Pamela, a mistake that showed his mind was elsewhere, likely on the money he thought he was about to control. He looked at me with an expression of deep, fraudulent concern. "We've been worried about Mom lately." A stunned silence fell over our guests. James Peterson set his cup down with deliberate care. Richard Bennett leaned forward, his expression shifting from curiosity to alarm. "She's been making some unwise financial choices," Thomas continued, warming to his theme. "Investing in a risky venture like a bookstore, isolating herself from family guidance. She's not getting any younger, and we feel it's on duty, as her loving family, to step in." "Step in how, Thomas?" James asked, his voice dangerously mild. "We think it's time to consider a power of attorney arrangement," Thomas declared, dropping the bomb he'd been carrying all evening. "For her own protection, of course, to help her manage her assets and ensure her long-term security." Richard Bennett looked appalled. "A power of attorney? Thomas, your mother seems perfectly sharp to me." "You don't understand," Thomas insisted, his voice rising with frustration. "She's always relied on Dad and then on me for financial guidance. Now suddenly she's making these irrational choices on her own. It's a classic sign of diminished capacity." This was it. The final, unforgivable insult. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. This moment had been inevitable from the day I first said no. I set down the cake knife I was holding. The play was over. It was time for the curtain to fall. "Enough," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tense silence with the sharpness of shattered glass. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. I remained seated, a queen on her throne, and looked directly at my son. "I am not irrational, I am not incapacitated, and I am most certainly not in need of your guidance, Thomas.
I said, my voice resonating with a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. Mom, be reasonable, Thomas pleaded, the concerned son mask slipping to reveal the frustrated greed beneath. You're embarrassing us in front of our guests. No, Thomas, I replied, a small, cold smile touching my lips. I'm not embarrassing you. I'm simply giving you the stage you so clearly desire, and you are playing your part magnificently. He stared at me, uncomprehending. He expected a fight, tears, a capitulation from a weak old woman. He was not prepared for this icy composure. He was not prepared for me. After everything we've done for you, he sputtered, his face flushing a deep mottled red. No, let's talk about what I've done for you. I countered, my voice rising slightly. I've paid for your renovations. I've paid for your cars. I've paid for your lavish vacations. I paid for a wedding where you and your wife thought it was appropriate to label me as a walking checkbook. His face contorted with rage. You selfish old woman, he hissed, standing up so abruptly his chair screeched against the hardwood floor. You think you can just cut us off? Dad would be ashamed of you. That was the final trigger. The invocation of my husband's name, the desecration of his memory with their greed. I stood up slowly, deliberately, my red dress a slash of defiance in the softly lit room. The moment had arrived. You know, Thomas, I said, my voice now calm and conversational, it's funny you should mention your father. He was always thinking ahead. He worried this day might come. I turned my gaze from my son's furious face and settled it on my lawyer. James, I said, my voice ringing with command, I believe you have a document that might be relevant to this discussion. Would you be so kind to read the addendum to my husband's will, the section we discussed? I believe it's called the respect clause. The power in the room shifted instantly. I wasn't asking for help. I was giving an order. I was the one in control. James, the consummate professional, simply nodded. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced a familiar, thick envelope. Thomas and Victoria watched, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion, a dawning horror beginning to flicker in their eyes. James cleared his throat. As executor of the estate of Edward C. Wilson, he began, his voice formal and sonorous, I am bound to enforce all its articles. This includes a codicil, added by Mr. Wilson on October 14th, 3 years ago. He put on his reading glasses and read from the document. Should any direct descendant or their spouse publicly humiliate my beloved wife Margaret, or treat her with profound respect, or attempt to control her finances against her will, that descendant shall forfeit their entire share of the inheritance due to them upon my wife's passing. He let the words hang in the air. Victoria made a small choking sound. James continued, the determination of such an act shall be at the discretion of the executor based on credible evidence or witness testimony. The forfeited share shall then be redistributed, with 50% going directly to my wife, Margaret Wilson, to do with as she pleases, and the remaining 50% to be divided equally among any descendants who have not violated this clause. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Victoria's ragged breathing. That's ridiculous, Thomas finally managed to say. Dad would never. He did, James said flatly, and as the executor, I have been documenting events for the past several months. The name tag at the wedding, the public announcement at the brunch, and this concerted attempt to declare your mother incompetent in order to gain control of her assets. These actions most certainly meet the criteria for public humiliation and attempted financial control. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. He was the executor, but I was the judge. I looked at my son, at the man he had become, his face pale with shock. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who seemed to have aged 10 years in as many seconds. Then I looked at Michael, whose expression was of quiet, sorrowful validation, and at Sophia, whose face was streaked with tears of shame. Yes, James, I said, my voice as clear and final as a judge's gavel. Enforce the clause. The words, enforce the clause, hung in the air, irrevocable and devastating. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if I had detonated a bomb, and they were all frozen in the instant before the blast wave hit. Thomas was the first to react. He collapsed back into his chair as if his legs had been cut out from under him. You can't, he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Mom, you can't be serious.
I have never been more serious in my life, I replied, my voice devoid of the anger I'd felt before. All that was left was a vast, quiet emptiness. This isn't a punishment, Thomas. This is a consequence. The consequence of years of taking, of demanding, of seeing me not as your mother, but as a resource to be drained. But our inheritance, Victoria whimpered, the words barely audible. She looked at James, her eyes wide with panic. All of it? All of it, James confirmed, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The clause is quite clear. Your line of inheritance from the Wilson estate is now terminated. Richard Bennett, who had been watching the entire drama unfold with the stunned fascination of an outsider, finally spoke. My God, Edward, he breathed, shaking his head. You magnificent, cunning old fox. You always were playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. His words seemed to break the spell. Richard, my son, shot to his feet, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. This is a setup, a trick. You lured us here, you old witch, pretending to be weak, letting us believe. Letting you believe what, Thomas? That I was a fool? That my love for this family was a weakness you could exploit forever? I didn't lure you into anything. I simply held up a mirror, and this ugly reflection is what you showed me. Sophia, who had been crying silently, finally broke. She stood up and turned on her parents, her small frame trembling with a rage I had never seen in her. She's right, she cried, her voice thick with tears. How could you? The name tag, I was so embarrassed and I didn't say anything. I let you do it. How could you treat Grandma like that? You stay out of this, Sophia, Victoria snapped, her fear now curdling into venom. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have every idea. I have a conscience, something you two clearly lost a long time ago. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I should have been stronger. I should have defended you. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold and trembling. We all make mistakes, sweetheart, I said softly. The question is what we learn from them. Thomas, meanwhile, had turned his rage on his son. And you, he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Michael, you were in on this, weren't you, poisoning her mind against us? Michael stood his ground, calm and unyielding. I didn't know about the will, Dad, he said evenly, but I didn't need a document to know that what you were doing was wrong. I was just having dinner with my grandma. Something you might have tried sometime without asking for money. The simplicity of his words was more damning than any legal clause. Thomas spun back to James. I'll contest this. I'll get a lawyer. We'll fight this in court. James simply smiled, a thin, pitying smile. You are welcome to try, Thomas. It will be a very expensive, very public, and very short fight. The codicil is legally ironclad, and we have ample evidence, including witness testimony from Mr. Bennett and others, that the conditions have been met beyond any reasonable doubt. You would be throwing your money away. What little you have left, that is. That was the final blow. The mention of their own precarious finances, now laid bare without the safety net of my inheritance, seemed to drain the last of the fight out of them. Victoria began to sob, a theatrical, self-pitying sound.
Alice, surely we can work this out, she pleaded, her voice suddenly cloying. As a family, we never meant. Save it, Victoria, I said, turning my back on her. The time for lies was over. Thomas stared at me, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and bewilderment. So that's it, he demanded. After a lifetime, you're just cutting me off? I faced my son, the child I had raised, the man I no longer recognized. No, Thomas, and the distinction was the most important I had ever made. After a lifetime of me doing for you, I am finally standing up for myself. There's a difference. There was nothing more to say. The gathering ended in a shattered, awkward silence. Richard and James made their tactful exits, promising to call. Sophia and Mark left with tearful apologies. Michael stayed to help me clear the barely touched dessert plates. And then Thomas and Victoria were gone, storming out into the night without another word, leaving behind them the wreckage of a family they had broken and a fortune they had lost. As the door slammed shut, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, quiet, and liberating sense of peace. I was free. The days following my birthday party were like the quiet after a hurricane. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was irrevocably changed. The house was silent, but it was a peaceful silence, no longer filled with the anxious anticipation of a demanding phone call. True to his word, Thomas tried to fight the will. It was, as James had predicted, a short and humiliating affair. His lawyer took one look at the codicil and the evidence James had compiled, including sworn affidavits from Richard Bennett and Dr. Rebecca Chen, and advised him to drop the case. The legal battle was over before it began. The real consequences played out more slowly, in the small details of their unraveling lives. I heard the story in snippets from Sophia, who made it a point to visit me every Sunday. First, the country club membership was canceled. Then the luxury cars were sold and replaced with more practical second-hand models. Finally, the ultimate blow to Victoria's pride, they had to sell their sprawling house in the upscale suburb and move to a much smaller rental on the other side of town. Mom is bitter, Sophia told me one afternoon over tea. She blames you for everything. Dad just seems defeated. He lost his promotion at work. Apparently, the story of what happened got around. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. There was no joy in their downfall, only a sad finality. Don't be, Sophia said, her voice firm. They made their choices. I'm making mine. And she was. She had refused to be dragged down with them. She and Mark had taken the modest wedding check I had given them and had a lovely, simple honeymoon in Cape Cod. She started volunteering at a local animal shelter, and more surprisingly, she started helping Michael with the planning for his bookstore. I need to do something real, Grandma, she explained. Something that isn't about appearances or what other people think. Watching her blossom, watching her find her own strength and moral compass was a source of immense joy. Our relationship, once strained by her parents' influence, was now being rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect.
I, too, was rebuilding. With the cloud of my family's demands lifted, I felt lighter, more adventurous. I threw myself into my painting, and to my astonishment, people wanted to buy my art. I joined a senior travel group and took a 2-week trip to Italy, something I'd always dreamed of. I saw the Colosseum and the canals of Venice, and I ate gelato under the Tuscan sun. On that trip, I met a charming widower from Boston named Claude, a retired history professor with kind eyes and a dry wit who made me laugh for the first time in years. We exchanged numbers, and he called me every Sunday just to talk. Life was opening up in ways I had never expected. The money from the forfeited inheritance, a staggering sum, sat in a trust account managed by James.
I used a portion of it to fully fund Michael's bookstore, ensuring he could start his business debt-free. The rest, I decided, would be part of a new plan, a new legacy. One of the most healing parts of my new life was my relationship with Nathan. He was a constant, steady presence. He never once mentioned the inheritance he was due to receive. His love and concern had never been transactional. When I finally sat him down with James to discuss the transfer of funds, he was genuinely shocked at the amount. "Grandma, this is too much," he'd stammered. "Your grandfather wanted to reward character, Michael," I had told him, using his proper name for the serious occasion. "And you, my dear, have it in spades. Use it well." The bitterness that had settled in my heart for 3 long years was slowly washing away, replaced by something new. It wasn't the giddy happiness of my youth, but something quieter, deeper. It was contentment. It was peace. It was the profound satisfaction of knowing I had weathered the storm and found my way back to solid ground, stronger and more myself than ever before. 1 year to the day after that fateful birthday party, I stood in the doorway of a charming converted Victorian house downtown. A beautifully carved wooden sign hung above the porch reading, Chapter 1. This was Michael's dream, brought to life. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating shelves stacked high with carefully curated books. The air smelled of old paper and freshly brewed coffee from the small counter in the corner, where a bright young woman named Emma, Michael's girlfriend, was serving homemade scones. In the children's section, a whimsical forest mural I had painted covered an entire wall, a vibrant world of hidden animals and fairy houses. Twice a week, I came here to lead story time for neighborhood children, my voice full of theatrical joy as I read about brave knights and talking squirrels. The bell over the door jingled, and Sophia walked in, pushing a stroller. She smiled when she saw me. "Grandma, I didn't know you'd be here today." "Just dropping off some new bookmarks I painted," I said, bending down to admire the tiny, sleeping baby in the stroller. "Hello, little one." The baby's name was Roberta, named after her great-grandfather, Edward Robert Wilson. The gesture had moved me to tears. As Sophia and I sat at a small table, sipping lattes Emma had brought over, Michael emerged from the back room, his face lit with the quiet pride of a creator. He joined us, his arm resting naturally on the back of my chair. "Perfect timing," he said. "I wanted to run an idea by you both." He explained his plan to use some of the store's profits to start free literacy tutoring for adults and writing workshops for teens. "It's about giving back," he said simply. "That's what this place should be about." I looked at him, at my grandson, so full of integrity and vision. I looked at Sophia, a loving mother and a woman who had found her own way. I looked at the beautiful, sunlit bookstore, a space that represented not just a business, but a new chapter for our family, one built on trust and respect, not obligation and greed. In the years since the revelation, I had discovered parts of myself I thought were long gone. My trip to Italy had been followed by a cruise through the Alaskan fjords. Claude from Boston had come to visit, and we had spent a wonderful week exploring the coast. My world, which had shrunk to the size of my grief and my family's demands, had become vast and full of possibility again. I thought of Edward. I knew he would have approved. He had tried to protect me with his codicil, a shield he hoped I'd never need. But in the end, the true shield wasn't a legal document. It was the strength I had to find within myself. The will gave me a weapon, but I was the one who had to learn how to wield it. I had to learn that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I had to learn that my own happiness was a worthy investment. I had to learn that my value as a person was not tied to my bank account. Baby Roberta let out a happy gurgle, drawing me back to the present. This was my family now. Not perfect, not complete, but real and true. We were building something new and beautiful from the ruins of what had been lost. "What do you think, Grandma?" Michael asked, pulling me back into the conversation about the workshops. I smiled. A genuine, soul-deep smile. I looked at my grandson and my granddaughter, at the baby who represented our future, and at this wonderful place that had grown from the best parts of us. I think, I said, my voice full of a quiet, unshakable certainty, I think that this is exactly where we're supposed to be. My journey wasn't easy, but it taught me that your worth isn't defined by what you can give to others, but the respect you demand for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story.